evening, everyone, and good evening to those who may be watching at
Recording
home.
in progress.
Let me say that again. Good evening, everyone, and good evening to those at home who may be watching. This is a meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee of the Newton City Council, and we are joined at the start of the meeting by several members of the committee. We're joined by Councilor Kalis from Ward 8, Councilor Wright from Ward 3, Councilor Oliver, Vice Chair of the committee from Ward 1, Councilor Farrell, a guest to the committee from Ward 8, and I thought Councilor Albright is also here from Ward 2. So the framework for tonight's discussion is that we have, and we've just been joined by Councilor Danberg from Ward 6. The framework for tonight's discussion is going to be a public hearing and then some discussion on some items, but I also want to recognize, if I can, and I'll ask for some assistance from our very able clerk, Ms. Norden, members of the Planning and Development Board who meet with us when we have a public hearing on an item. And so I wanted to recognize Mr. McCormick, who's the chair, and ask you if you would introduce those members of your planning board who are here, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Chairman Baker. Yes, I'm here as the chair of the committee. Lee Breckenridge is here. Kelly Brown is here. And Peter Doringer is just showing up.
Wonderful. And if others come along, please let us know and we'll make sure to try and recognize them too. We're grateful for your attendance. So the first item on the public hearing is an item 7624-2, a discussion and possible ordinance amendment to require a special permit for retaining walls over 4 feet. And I think it would be helpful if the department is willing to present, which I think you are, a little background for members of the public. We know something about it from our prior work in committee, but I think it would be helpful in framing the conversation and the public opportunity to speak. Who's going to do this? Mr. Lamel? Oh, well, you are. Okay. Please. Do you want to come up here and do that? You can do it from there?
I can do it from here, yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
All right. And just introduce yourself properly. I didn't do it properly for you.
Sure. So my name is Olivia James. I work in the planning department as the community engagement specialist.
Thank
so
you.
I will share my screen.
Okay.
All right, so we will be discussing the grading and retaining walls amendment that we split off from the original docket item, making this docket number 7624-2. So on the agenda, we will discuss the overview of this proposed amendment, then get into what the existing regulations are. We'll then focus on what the issue is that this amendment is aiming to address and some examples. We'll then go over the proposed ordinance amendment and discuss next steps. So for our overview, as I mentioned, this docket item was split. ZAP will take it on at a later date. Right now, we're only discussing the proposed amendment to require a special permit for retaining walls over 4 feet anywhere on the property. This is the first attempt in addressing the larger grading and retaining wall issues, and more amendments will be proposed after this. We thought we would start.
No, let me just point out, you see more amendments. That's to the second docket item we've retained, right? Just to be clear. Okay, yep. Carry on. Thank you.
So we thought we would start out with an example of the issue we're trying to address. This property was originally on 15 Chase Street. You can see in the plan view, it straddled 2 roads front to back, Brayland Avenue and Chase Street. The house was more oriented toward Chase and was of modest size. This is what the property looks like now, still under construction. The original lot slope on the Brayland side was replaced by steep retaining walls in order to build a larger structure that takes up more of the lot. And the structure is now oriented both towards Brayland and Chase. These retaining walls are outside the setback and under existing regulations are allowed by right. In this proposed amendment to the ordinance, however, a special permit would be required for this development. So now we're going to look at what the existing regulations are. Our existing regulations focus on retaining walls within the setback and do not address retaining wall height or have other regulations outside the setback. Interestingly, under the Village Center Overlay District zoning, a special permit is required for all retaining walls over 4 feet anywhere on the property, and this ordinance formed the basis of the proposed amendment we're discussing tonight. Now we're going to take a closer look at what the issue is and some examples. We're addressing the issue of having no regulations on height or any discretionary review for retaining walls outside the setback. This wall is in Newton Corner at 20 Washington Street and greatly impacts neighboring homes, as you can see from these vantage points. In another example, we're returning to the original one that we showed, and we see the difference of the street view along Braylon Avenue in Newton Center. This property is in Lower Falls at the corner of Grove Street and Hager Street. The original lot faced Grove at 633 Grove Street, and the new house faces Hager, which is at a lower elevation. Through the use of retaining walls over 4 feet outside the setback, which are currently allowed by right, the developer was able to greatly increase the size of the home. This property is in Oak Hill at 29 Levbert Road. Similarly, this lot's slope was greatly increased by the use of retaining walls over 4 feet outside the setback. At 8 Browning Road in Newton Center, at the corner of Parker Street, we see this home. It originally faced Parker and now faces Browning, which is at a lower elevation. It's still under construction in this image to the right. However, through the use of retaining walls over 4 feet outside the setback, you can see how this allowed the developer to cut out space for a 2-car garage. As you can see, this issue is coming up across Newton and not just in 1 or 2 villages. So let's look at the proposed amendment. First, here's the language of the existing ordinance. Section B is the main area we're addressing in the proposed amendment, where it specifies that a special permit is only needed for a retaining wall 4 feet or more within the setback. Taking a look at what we're proposing, in Section A, we basically cleaned up the language a bit. Looking at Section B, the 2 main differences are that 1, we are limiting the height of retaining walls to under 4 feet by right anywhere on the property. Or in other words, if you want to build a retaining wall that is 4 feet or more, regardless of its location, you would need a special permit. And 2, we are limiting how closely you can combine retaining walls by right. We're proposing that when a combination of retaining walls are within 25 feet of each other, measured from the front of each wall, you would need a special permit when they are 4 feet or more in combined height. We also added Section C, which adds criteria for granting a special permit. C 1, 2, and 3 give council the discretion needed.
Can you just, I'm sorry, would you just pause for a minute and go over those so people, they went by quickly and the public might not see that? You don't mind reading the three criteria?
Sure. So in Section C, to grant a special permit, the criteria is 1, that the lot presents challenging topography, which limits the use of the property, such that it could not be improved without the implementation of retaining walls. 2, that the requested retaining wall will not adversely impact adjacent property or the public. And 3, that the proposed retaining wall is the minimum structure necessary to allow a subject property to be reasonably utilized.
Thank you, and I'll try and use the mic thanks to my colleagues who go ahead. Carry on.
So for the visual folks in the audience, we prepared a few diagrams to illustrate how this amendment would play out. Here, because the 2 retaining walls highlighted by the red annotations are more than 25 feet apart, they're allowed by right, and their combined height does not need to be less than 4 feet. In this section, the 3 retaining walls are within 25 feet, however, their combined height is less than 4 feet. This would also be allowed by right. If, in this example, the taller wall was built closer to the shorter walls, making it so that the 3 walls are within 25 feet and their combined height is more than 4 feet, this would require a special permit. So now this is what the proposed amendment looks like clean, without any of the red lines. And so, based on discussions with ISD, to avoid complications with permits already in progress, we recommend an effective date of June 1st. And so now, looking forward towards next steps. As I mentioned at the beginning, this proposed amendment is not intended to solve all the retaining wall issues. This is just a first step. The planning department, with the help of ISD and engineering, will continue to explore additional zoning amendments that would further address grade manipulation, height of homes, and loss of starter homes. These will be brought up under the original docket number 7624.
Thank you very much. Does that conclude the presentation? Thank you very much, Ms. James. So I'd like now to ask any colleagues who have any questions before I entertain comments from the public. And I've noticed we've been joined by Councilor Getz, member of the committee, and also I recognize Councilor Kalis. So let me start with Councilor Getz for your question. And then Councilor Albright. Wait a minute. Okay, let me write them down here, folks. I'm with you all.
Okay, just a quick question. The 25 feet, how was that, just formulated? Was it something that you looked at average lot depth? What was the driving force for the 25 feet?
The length of it being 25?
So that was the recommendation of the Commissioner of Inspectional Services and the Chief Zoning Code Official. So they're trying to sort of recreate the current regulation that looks at the cumulative height of retaining walls within the setback. So they looked at the largest setback that we have in the zoning, which is 25 feet. And that seemed like a reasonable number as far as, combining wall heights. Beyond that, they really are acting like separate walls.
Okay. And let me just indicate the names I have. I've got Councilor Kalis, Councilor Wright, Councilor Oliver, and I see Councilor Krinsman online. And Councilor Albright, excuse me. And Albright and Danberg, okay? Oh, Mr. Doringer, all right. All right. So, Councilor Kalis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that presentation. It was very good. What I noticed is as you were going through it, you either mentioned within the setback or outside the setback, and on one case you talked about the entire property. What does this new ordinance apply to?
The entire property.
Oh, the entire property?
Yes.
Great, that's what I wanted. Thank you.
Okay, and I just saw Ms. Breckenridge, and I've added you to the list. Thank you. So, Councilor Wright.
Thank you. My question is, so it's only additive if it's within 25 feet. Why can't we just do any retaining walls throughout the whole property if it's over 4 feet that they have to have a special permit?
So, did you get that question? Okay, Ms. James?
You could. I think our recommendation working with ISD is 25 feet. You could have a, pretty deep property and a wall at the front and a wall at the rear. I think it's kind of hard to say that they should be combined and considered one wall. They could be well over 100 feet apart. We landed on 25 feet as that's sort of the largest setback that we see in the zoning. You could go higher than that, but that 25 feet is our recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you. Just a quick follow-up, I guess, because it's not, is that better?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, my fault. I just love these things so much. The idea, I thought, was that we were trying to prevent, right, some of the images we just saw a few minutes ago. Is what's in front of us going to prevent every one of those cases? I assume so.
Like I mentioned, this would just be a first step. This is trying to slow down the process of that coming to fruition.
Let me just follow his question. Would the amendment we have before us at least require each of those projects to have gone through a special permit?
Yes, they would have had to go through special permit.
Now, what we do with it, obviously, is,
Yes, that is what I meant, thank you, Chair, was to force them into a special permit process, which makes sense to me. But these, so if the 25 feet is because that's the max, that's the largest setback that we have, we would still be allowing, for example, as far as I understand it, 2 4-foot retaining walls that are 26 feet apart, right?
2 3-foot 11-inch walls that are 26 feet apart, correct, would be allowed.
Okay, thanks for the correction again. I appreciate that. That's all I've got. Otherwise, my questions are out there. Thank
Okay.
you.
let's see, I have Councilor Albright.
Thank you. So just to make sure I understand, if you have 2 4-foot retaining walls that are, let's say, 8 feet apart, they would be added up and become 8 feet. So it's 25 is the furthest away you would have to add the retaining walls. Okay. What if someone did terracing of 3-foot 11 retaining walls? It's, let's say, 8 feet to 7 feet apart. So you have 2 3-foot 11 retaining walls, 7 feet apart. Do they get added up?
They do.
So as long as the addition is more than 4 feet, they fall under this. Okay. And I'm a little concerned with the 3 criteria we've given the Land Use Committee. I know that Land Use Committee has discretion, but I can't see any reason, the one in Ward 1 that's like really, really tall, and the one that you showed us in, I forget where it is, Woburn? I forget where it was. The other one that's up on a hill with a large retaining wall. Can't we come up with some better criteria that would force the Land Use Committee to say no to those?
We think that there's good rationale to say no to those under the current criteria. I mean, I think it's hard to say that you needed those retaining walls for those lots. The one on Washington Street, the house was already there. They're looking for a flat lot for a pool and a basketball court. I think that would be an easy one to say no to. Again, we're open to suggestions. This is what we sort of workshopped with engineering and inspectional services and our current planning team and came up with. We think there's enough here for land use, but if there's any ideas for what you think are stronger criteria, happy to hear it.
Does this deal at all with water retention? Or is that dealt with another ordinance?
Yeah, that would be addressed with the stormwater ordinance.
Okay, so this is purely visual and how people feel about how it affects the neighborhood.
No, I don't think that's necessarily right. The stormwater ordinance will regulate the requirements for the retaining wall as far as stormwater and drainage go. That's absolutely something the Land Use Committee can consider as part of this, is how that impacts, the water runoff and what potential impacts that could have to neighbors, as well as aesthetics, sight lines, whether it's resulting in, a large amount of regrading and tree loss and how that impacts the neighbors. I think we kept it somewhat broad intentionally so that the council can consider multiple aspects of the impacts rather than having a narrowly sort of defined impact.
So my concern about the water runoff in particular is that if, I feel like the land use committee the current land use committee leaves all the water runoff issues to engineering, that let them deal with it. And that, so if they have a stormwater retention program that serves the engineering issues, then land use committee won't even deal with that unless we mention it. So that's just, I worry about that. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I just want to point out that the criteria in 2 is that the requested retaining wall will not adversely impact adjacent property. I think that's broad enough to include drainage if the committee is willing to interpret it that way. But that's.
It is, but the land use committee tends to leave the drainage issues to the engineering department. So that's my only caveat there.
Okay, thank you. I just want to note that we've been joined by Andrew Lee of the Law Department, also, I believe, Ms. Malinsky from the Planning and Development Board. Let me go on to the next speaker whom I have is Councilor Krinsman, member of the
Thank
committee.
you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize for not being there in person with you all this evening, but I'm here nonetheless. My question, I have two a question and comment. First question is about the criteria as laid out in the draft ordinance around the special permit. I believe the intention is for that to be an inclusive list. And so I'd love to just understand if A, that's the case, and B, if so, can we add an and after the second factor?
That's correct. That is the intent. So we can add that.
Okay, I think that would help clarify, though I certainly defer to legal if they feel differently. My other question is, I think sort of the trick here with ordinances like this is you always want to make sure that you capture all the, quote unquote bad guys, but allow the good guys. And so I would love to see some examples of retaining walls that we believe would meet these criteria that would have perhaps required a special permit, but would have likely been granted that special permit, just to get an understanding that, again, we're doing sort of both things here. We're capturing the ability to reject the retaining walls that, we all sort of note when we see it, the ones that we don't think are helpful, but also make sure that we're allowing folks who need a retaining wall to appropriately improve their property to do so.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Krinsman. I have Councilor Danberg and several other councilors. We've joined also by the Chair of Land Use, Councilor Kelly. But let me go to Councilor Danberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you go back to the Planning Department, please go back to showing the photo of the Braylon Street house, which is under construction? Can you pull that up? And while we're pulling it up, I have a question for anyone that can answer, and that is, what is the definition of a retaining wall? What does it have to retain? Does it have to retain earth? Go to the new version, the after version. Yes, thank you. Keep that up.
So do you want to talk about the image or do you want to answer? Just tell me which you prefer.
My question is, in this case, the property on the street above, Chase Street, is about 18 feet. The natural curve of the street, reduction in height of between the two streets, I'm going to guess at 18 feet or so. So what they've done here is they're not holding back earth. They've just put a gargantuan foundation. And the foundation doesn't hold back earth. It creates on the inside either basement or garage. And the result of this is that on Braylon Street, the first floor starts an entire floor above where every other house on the street starts. So is this a retaining wall? Does this fall under the category of what we're not allowing? Or is this something else that we need to deal with?
Well, not to put him on the spot, but the Commissioner of Inspectional Services has joined us.
Oh, good.
Commissioner, you're not obligated
Yes.
to respond. We want to recognize the Commissioner of Inspectional Services. Hope he doesn't injure himself in the process.
I just came into the room, so the question is that a retaining wall where the stairs lead up to? Is that what the question is?
Yes, because it's not holding back earth.
So there's no
just-
earth on the other side of
Nope,
that?
there is garage and basement.
But there's no earth between the house and the wall?
Not that I think that because the land slopes a good 18 feet down. So,
So as I look at that, I'm looking at the
just a gargantuan basement.
site plan to the right, and I believe, trying to get my bearings here. That wall is pictured towards Braylon Ave? Is that the one we're
Yes.
talking about?
Yep, it is.
So I do,
I thought when they were going to build this, that they would step the house down so that the house would be at street level on Chase Street, and then step down a good floor and match the height of the average first floor on Braylon. They didn't do that. For whatever reason, I don't know, is it cheaper to build it this way, or?
it looks as though there may be dirt or material below whatever walkway there is there that wall is supporting.
Let's assume that there isn't.
That there isn't?
Yeah.
So for me,
Would we allow this?
I think,
Yeah, because a retaining wall, what's the definition of a retaining wall?
that it retains fill or dirt.
Okay, if there's basement behind here or something else, a garage, we would allow this still under what we're suggesting. So I think we need to look at what we would do in this case, a case like this.
I think
Yeah,
that
and I think-
is a fair comment, but I think the item that is still under consideration would reach that specific issue.
Yeah, so most of these really will benefit from multiple amendments to the zoning. For this one, I think this wall is 12 feet. I don't know that their basement's 12 feet. So I would think this is retaining dirt at some point. But also, the other piece we're working on currently is how we measure height, and measuring potentially off of existing grade rather than the final grade. So this item alone may not completely resolve this, but we are working on other amendments as well.
Okay, if there's dirt behind here, they have filled it in because there wasn't dirt behind it prior to their building this, because of the extreme difference between the two streets. So, okay, I don't need an answer. I just want to point this out and comment that I would not be in favor of this being allowed in the future, even if there isn't dirt behind here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, and the department will take that under consideration, I'm sure. Mr. Doringer, from the Planning and Development Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was particularly concerned with the special permit criterion number 2, C2 that is, mentioning that the property should not adversely affect adjacent property. That's fine. And then the public, which I found a little bit amorphous as a concept, but it sounds like a very large population. And I was wondering if we could include in that criterion the neighborhood, because there are a lot of issues that would, I think, cause problems for neighborhoods and not just the butters, but yet not be sufficient to qualify as an adverse impact on the public. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take that under consideration. I now have Ms. Breckenridge of the Planning and Development Board.
Yes, there's a longstanding tangential question here, which has to do with the definition of structure in the definitions section. And often when we're talking about the retaining wall requirements, we speak kind of loosely about 4 or more feet or over 4 feet. But there's this pretty long-standing disparate use of the two terms. In other words, is 4 feet within the definition or not? And the term structure, which I can't remember all the places it terms up, but it spills over into the way that the building code applies, refers to retaining wall or systems of walls whose above grade height exceeds 4 feet, etc. And I was thinking, as a lawyer, it might be handy to straighten out the disparate uses of the measurement 4 feet and the way in which the wall is measured between these two places. So I just pitched that out there to the law department to think about as they finalize how this is put together. But there is a disparity that sometimes makes a difference there between those two definitions.
Thank you very much. I want to recognize Councilor Kelly and welcome, Chair of Land Use.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so happy that ZAP is looking into this. I wish I had been aware of it sooner. I would have been happy to chat about it sooner, happy to chat about it more as we go on. As you're probably aware, we see a lot of special permit applications for retaining walls over 4 feet or more in height, but now within the front setback. So I'm very glad to see that you're looking at them not just within the front setback, and you're looking at them as combined, because what we've seen increasingly is builders, developers, owners are getting around part of it by, as somebody mentioned, having series of 3'11" high walls that all add up to more than 4 feet. So I'm really pleased to see you addressing that aspect of it. In terms of comments that Councilor Albright was making about the Land Use Committee not considering drainage, I would say that that was particularly true of the most recent iterations of the Land Use Committee, which had a different membership and a different chair. We've had some kind of difference of opinion amongst members in the past about how much to consider this, because I will say that drainage and effect on abutting, and not just abutting, but nearby properties, neighboring properties, is something that we hear about from constituents and residents all the time. And for many of us, that is an important consideration. We have ultimately left most decisions up to engineering around that, but there's been a little touch and go on that, where engineering has been happy to have us look into it because they're concerned too. So I wouldn't say that drainage considerations, runoff considerations are not something that the Land Use Committee will take up. And the more you look at it, the more that will empower us to look at it as well. The beginning presentation was a little fast for me to keep up with. Right when I tried to take a note or take a screenshot, they moved on to the next topic, but there was something about one of the criteria being the inability to develop the site, and I'm just using those terms from my own memory.
Hang on a second, Councilor Kelly. We can put that language up for you. Can you put that up, please?
Because I don't want to use the wrong terminology, but how I interpreted that from Ms. James' presentation was, it felt very topography. The lot presents challenging topography, which limits the use of the property, which is starting to sound like a variance to me. such that it could not be improved without the implementation of retaining walls. I'll say that I think that is subjective, because a particular owner or developer might say, we're challenged, we can't improve the property, but somebody else already listed, maybe they can't improve it the way they want to, or they can't change it the way they want to, but the terminology of that red bullet number 1 under section 5.4.2.c is open to interpretation. And I could see people coming in saying that when it's not really the case that it can't be improved. Maybe they couldn't do what we see at that Brayland Ave property. I think the idea about not adversely affecting adjacent properties, not just adjacent, but neighborhood, as Mr. Duringer said, is really worth consideration. I don't think it's just about abutters or adjacencies, but the effects. We look at that on every special permit about not adversely having a greater impact on the neighborhood or the community. So just generally, I'm very glad that you're taking this up and hope that things get a little bit more finalized. Again, happy to work together, because we see all these things come before us for, at land use. And I think the more you can set things in play that help guide us later when people come in, the better it'll be for everybody. So I'm very happy to see you having this initial conversation.
Thank you. You can stop sharing the screen now, I think, just if you don't mind, so we can see who's. I think now I have Councillor Getz as a repeat, and then Councillor Kalis I have as a repeat. Oh, and Councillor Wright. Thank you.
Okay, there's just one quick question that I have. In the definition itself, it talks about the walls being lined up. So what would prevent somebody from pedestaling a lot? Just in terms of being able to do, the buildup of perpendicular walls. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they have the front-facing wall, and then the perpendicular walls, and then a wall in the, if needed, in the back. So, just because they're proximal, they're right next to each other, but they're not, when you look at the definition, measured from the front face of the wall to the front face of the wall. So they're knocked out, right? So I would like to capture, not being able to pedestal a lot.
Ms. Kyra?
Yeah, I think, so this would not capture that. You could have a 3'11" wall sort of that goes around the perimeter, right? Because we are counting sort of walls in parallel it's meant to be for terraced walls. The pedestal is what we're really trying to get at with the other item we're working on, where we're looking at how we measure height. So this will not solve the pedestal house, but we are hoping to come back with other amendments that will get at that issue.
I'm going to recognize Councillor Kalis. Before I do, Ms. Breckenridge, your hand is up. Do you want to be heard again?
No, thanks.
Okay, no, I appreciate hearing from you. Councillor Kalis.
Thank you. So just so you know my opinion, all the criteria I think are subjective, but I think they're very good. They're well written, so I appreciate those. I really share the concerns that Councillor Albright talked about with water, and it gets to the 25 feet, and maybe this is unrealistic, but what if we have a wide lot and they put 2 retaining walls under 4 feet, so maybe it's 1.5 feet each on the sides, because they're trying to channel the water somewhere, and it's beyond the 25 feet. Are those allowed?
So I think now you're getting into the stormwater regulations.
Well, I am, and part of this is because as much as land use and even engineering think or want to be able to control the water, nobody really knows what's underground. And engineering does its best to understand that. And there's been many situations now where there's the water in our neighbors' are just, it's just piling up and piling up. So I want to make sure this is as strong as possible.
Understood. And I think there's two aspects. There's groundwater, which is a totally separate issue. And, you know, some places like Ward 8 is a really serious issue. And then there's the stormwater runoff. You know, the ordinance was updated to be, you know, far more comprehensive, the stormwater regulations in, I think, mid-2022. So we're really just seeing the effect of that because application for a new home had to come in after that. That ordinance went into effect, finish construction, and then see the impact of those changes. So I don't think a lot of the issues we're seeing that have been coming up recently, I think are still a result of the previous stormwater ordinance, which didn't capture as many things. And retaining walls are specifically one of the things that triggers some level of stormwater review and permitting under the current ordinance. So it would be reviewed. They are looking at where that water goes. As far as adding to retaining walls over 26 feet or 25 feet, we wouldn't capture it here. But there would be a sort of permitting process still for those retaining walls.
Could we make the 25 feet 50 feet? I mean, or just so you can't do that, so you can't channel water in a way with two walls, as small as they might be.
I think that's a legitimate question, but I'm not sure this ordinance framed as the moment is going to solve that as I hear it. Now, we might amend the language of the criteria if you want, or the number. I think the scope of the item is broad enough, and we can ask the law department what our discretion is, but it's currently framed. I'm not sure it'll deal with that, but it can be part of the conversation for the second item that's coming back. And I would like to hope we can move on this one as quickly as we can, and that gives us a little breathing room to get the other one. But these are the comments you're making, the comments other counselors making, Councilor Danberg and Councilor Albright, again, are issues that I think are appropriate for that second round, if not here. But that's just my perception of the situation.
I agree. I'll let it go unless others agree with me, but I just feel that we could add on some feet and be better protected. But
well, that's fair, and we have that opportunity to talk about it. This is just an initial presentation, and we still have the public hearing comments, and then we'll bring it back into committee. I just want to get clarifying matters done first. I do have Councilor Wright, and then I can recognize Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Chair. I agree, and then what I was going to say with Councilor Kalis, you know, 25 feet is kind of arbitrary. I would like to see the whole lot, but if we're not going to do that, let's do 50 feet. You know, it is a number, and let's just do it with that. And then why 4 feet? Why not 3 feet? Where did the 4 feet come from?
The 4 feet came from the current ordinance, so we were looking to move something relatively quickly while we take a more comprehensive look at the grading and issues we're seeing on sites. I believe 4 feet is also when you need an engineer to design the wall.
Okay, thank you.
It's a term of art already, and so I want to make sure I've heard from all the colleagues about anybody online I haven't caught. Councilor Farrell, you've been discreet and quiet, but you don't have to say anything. But I just want to. All right. Councilor Albright, I just want to make sure I got him on the list. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was just resonating with something that Councilor Kelly said about that I bullet number 1, where you said something, Ms. Kyra, about a basketball court or a tennis court or a swimming pool, which I happen to know a constituent who had a problem with a retaining wall that was built so that the people could do a swimming pool on their property, and it backed up to the other people's property. And you know, do we owe people basketball courts, swimming courts, or swimming pools or tennis courts? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how the land use committee is going to make that decision of whether it's okay or not to add a 4-foot retaining wall to put in a swimming pool. I just don't see the language here that would give them the ability to say no, because they're going to say, well, I whatever that language is. I need to develop my land. This is how I want to use my land. So I don't know what criteria the land use committee is going to use to say no on that. That's just my question, to figure that one out.
Okay. So is that all the clarifying questions at the moment? I'd like to see if there's any member of the public who would like to be heard on this item. We're just trying to set the stage for the public comment.
I'll move to open the public hearing.
Say again?
I'll move to open the public hearing.
Oh, I was about to do that, but thank you. The public hearing is open. Does anyone wish to be heard? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Oh, we have someone? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Ms. Belbo is online. I didn't see that. Thank you, Ms. Norton. Ms. Norton protects me from myself. Carry on. Ms. Belbo, we have a general 3-minute comment period. Thank you, Councilor Wright. This is our new technology.
Sorry for the delay. I was waiting to be promoted to a panelist. I apologize for using your first name, Olivia, but it's cut off in the view. But when Olivia shared the original presentation and the question was asked if everything that was kind of shown as an example would be addressed by what was being proposed, and the answer was yes. But then I believe it was Councilor Danberg who pushed a little harder, and I appreciate that, on the Brayland. And I thought that Ms. Cairo said that actually everything that was being proposed might not address what was being proposed or what is being built on the project at Brayland. And I think Councilor Danberg's point was well taken, to try to push on what's the definition of a retaining wall, because I happen to agree that I don't think that's holding back any earth. But I've heard a couple of times from the planning department, and I think it was mostly from Ms. Cairo, that this is just a start. It's just a beginning. And I would just challenge the committee to maybe go a little bigger and not bite this off and like this is just a start and we'll do something more down the road, because this is a problem. Anyway, thanks for allowing me the time to talk.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking less than 3 minutes. Anyone else wish to be heard? Oh, there's another hand raised. Who have we got? Ms. Norton. Ms. Norton will tell me who it is. I can't see. It's a little small for my. Isn't it? Mark Sangiolo, is that it? Okay, thank you. Mr. Sangiolo, you wish to be heard as soon as we get you promoted to a panelist?
Yes, hi. How's everyone tonight? I just got wind of this just a little while ago, so certainly the one on Brayland, that's a problem. I mean, obviously it's so ugly, that wall. But I think that we need a little more study on this. I suggest that you get the architects group back together and they can help advise the planning department, because some of these things are very arbitrary. I'd like to see the encouragement of the terraced walls. If you start saying, oh, you can't terrace this wall, you can't terrace that wall, then you end up with this 12-foot wall. The 25-foot setback, I think, is a bit extreme. The reason that that wall exists there in Brayland, when you're dealing with a couple things, you're dealing with an FAR issue and you're dealing with a height issue. So if you can wrap a wall around your building 6 feet out, you start minimizing the impact that the basement starts counting as the FAR, and also the average grade gets raised up. So you start mitigating the height of the building. So that this is another way that this could be approached too, is to start looking at those issues rather than trying to regulate the retaining walls on the site outside of the setback. And then the other thing is there's a big difference in when somebody's cutting their property and putting a wall in, and when somebody's filling and putting a wall in. They have two completely different visual impacts. The thing about the engineering stuff too, I don't understand, how's land use going to get involved in the engineering stuff? That's way beyond your expertise. All the water on the site is supposed to be kept on the site. That's engineering's job to approve those drawings that the design to retain the water. So I don't know how land use is going to get involved in that. So that's what I would recommend. I think this needs a little more study than that one awful project that you're showing. And I think that the architects group can help, or get some group together. They can study the different visual things that's going on here and what's driving this, and make some recommendations and help the planning department or the zoning department. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Ms. Norton, have I missed anybody? I depend on you for the virtual community. Is it? Okay. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. A motion is made by Councilor Kalis to close the public hearing. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed? Excuse me, Councilor Albright. We're going to take it up in committee now.
Okay, but if we do ask an architects group to look at this, which I think might be a good idea,
well,
then we might want to leave the public hearing open.
We could certainly do that. It's just let's think about that process. We just took a vote, and I would entertain a motion to reconsider if you want to, but I don't think it precludes us getting information, but I think the formal process, I'd like to at least move along. Okay, so we have this item, and it doesn't mean there can't be further input, but I want to get a sense of where the department is. We had, in addition to the sort of general policy question of studying the issue, which I still think is open for the second item, there were, at least as I heard it, 3 specific suggestions regarding language. One was to, well, Councilor Krinsman and our resident grammarian made sure we have an and. We also have the recommendation that I think that it may be that to include some reference to drainage even in the special permit criteria. At least that's heard that from Councilor Albright. I also heard from Mr. Doringer the recommendation to add the word neighborhood in. And then there's a question of whether, in fact, 25 feet should be a different number. So I think it's important to have the committee have a conversation about that and decide where we want to go with the item. And also there is just a general point that some of these things will indeed be taken up later in the other item, but I think it's important to try and recognize that we have right now in the VC districts regulation of these walls anywhere they appear on the site. Is that correct? And then in the VC districts, these 4 foot, I mean, in the sense of a special permit requirement.
That's correct.
Is there any 25 foot threshold in the VC districts, or just wherever they appear?
There isn't. So we probably would want, I mean, I think we would go back to the definition of retaining wall, which is where we put that 25 foot in this. So whatever we do here, I believe, would also carry through to the VCOD.
Now, I don't know if that was advertised as such, so we might have to do that at the second stage, right? Because we didn't include the VCOD district in the advertisement. Is the law department, Mr. Lee, do we have the ability to modify this definition in the VCOD as well as here?
I can't recall where in the VCOD it mentions the retaining wall. The current public hearing notice simply states that what is being considered by the Zoning and Planning Committee is requiring a special permit for a retaining wall over 4 feet anywhere on the property. I can take a look to see if whatever is being proposed to be changed in the VCOD falls under that. I don't know off the top of my head right now.
So we didn't define retaining wall differently under the VCOD. And the way we wrote it is we default to the other definitions in the code unless it's superseded by a different definition within the VCOD. So I believe because we didn't define retaining wall, we would go back to the definition, the general definition, the ordinance that we're talking about here.
Okay, so now that would take out the 50-foot reference, or I just want to be clear of the impact of where we are. Right now, as I understand it, the proposal before us would say, for those areas that are not already covered by the VCOD, we would add in a special permit criterion, correct? Mr. Lamel, you're welcome to come to a chair, and you can easier rather than.
I think what would end up happening is that the language that's in the VCOD would become redundant, and it would be as part of a cleanup item at a later date. We would just delete that language, and it would be superseded by this language here.
Okay, so we'll take care of that, but that doesn't preclude us from doing something here. Okay, so what is the will of the committee? I mean, do you wish to entertain any of these amendments to the item now and go forward with it? We recognize Councilor Albright.
So I'm not sure what your question is. Is your question? Go ahead.
We have the item is before us. We had some comments as part of the public hearing about specific language changes. We could entertain those as recommendations to us as a committee, and then decide whether to take those up and vote them tonight and send the matter on to the council, or we can hold on to the item in committee and then vote it at a later date. Right? Is that before us? Am I correct? Yes, the Planning Development Board has to meet and also decide what to do.
Yeah, I'm wondering how people would feel about having, asking, I mean, there's a group of architects that we typically ask for comments, or the building professionals group, or any other group that's not us that is in the trade. I wonder how people feel about asking that.
We did meet with them.
And Ms. Kara?
Right, we did meet with the members of the building professionals group because they reached out to us on this item, asking us to meet with them. And we're generally supportive, and we sent them the language to see if they had any comments.
Okay. Councilor Wright, and then Councilor Kalis.
So the thing is, and probably addressing Mr. Sangiolo's question is, this is not saying you can't do it. It just means you have to have a special permit. And so there are going to be cases where, you know, you're going to have those retaining walls, and that's fine. But we just, those couple of examples there, we don't want. I think we should move ahead and discuss some of the other suggestions coming up tonight.
All right, Councilor Kalis?
I agree with Councilor Wright. I think moving ahead is right, and I'm glad that the planning department already talked to the architects group. I guess I would maybe wait 2 weeks to let the planning department come back to see if that 25 feet should be 25 or 35 or what they recommend if
There's not a 2-week window here. We have I think we've got the budget coming up, right? We're going to have a fair amount of time. I guess if I can express my preference is that this is an opportunity for the committee to get something started and done. It doesn't mean that if we want to add some language like you've indicated, change the 25 feet to another number at a later time. I think we can certainly do that. But my sense so far is that there's an opportunity to make its modification that will start a process soon to help the city, and then we've got a bigger item to pick up and clean up some of the other things. So while I don't want the best to be the enemy of the good here, we have an opportunity, and I hope that we might seize it. But let me hear from other members of the committee. Councilor Danberg and then Councilor Gadd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am generally in favor of the language that we see here. I think that what you have attempted to do in amending this is a definite step in the right direction. And I do think that yes, it would be a good idea if we were able to move forward on something that would help us out. However, I still have some question on things like this Brayland item and whether or not, if there is no dirt behind that wall, whether that wall could be created. And do we need to tweak this a little bit more to handle circumstances that
I
that
think-
we even see in front of us?
I can't speak for the department, but my sense is that that item may not be covered completely by this draft, but you have an opportunity to do something in a second round of the conversation about that item. So it's not like everything has to ride on this particular.
So I also took a quick look at their permitting, and it does say, their permitting does say retaining walls. So I just quickly looked at their permitting, and they have checked off in their engineering permit that they're building retaining walls.
Okay, so in this circumstance,
I think this would be caught. Like I said, the height aspect is another critical piece here, and that's what we're hoping to come back with next.
okay, all right. Yes, we just want to make sure that we catch what we want to catch, and don't, because of definition of a retaining wall or something else, allow things to still go through that we had hoped that we would catch going through.
Fair point.
The issue of water retention, I think, is an important one. And I want to make sure that, that if not here, then in the next docket item, we make sure that we address that properly.
Okay.
I am also glad to hear that the building, that the builders group has been consulted. And am I correct in assuming that they have said that they're okay with this language?
Yeah, they were supportive of the language, and I don't want to speak for them. We have not, they didn't send anything official in writing, but our meeting was positive. They were supportive. We didn't hear any further comments.
Okay, given that, and the desire to move forward and get something done, I would be okay if we wanted to move forward today, and if it's the will of the rest of the committee, would be prepared to move, to approve the language as we have it. But
Okay.
I would like to make sure that I'm not the only person who wants to move forward with this.
Well, we can sort that out, but I just want to be clear on what the language is, but I appreciate it. I do want to note that we need the Planning and Development Board, if they want to close their public hearing, they need an opportunity. Is that right? Okay, and so do we have a pause for 30 seconds while they act, or whatever I do? So, Mr. McCormick, thank you. I depend on my able clerk here to make sure I don't miss a dance step.
Thank you, Chairman Baker. Yes, I'd just like to ask get a motion from the board to close the public hearing.
So moved.
All in favor of closing the public hearing, to show of hands.
Aye.
Lee? Yeah. It's 5-4. Any abstentions? Any against? Thank you. Public hearing has been closed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to note that, and Chair Kelly has had her hand up, and I want to make sure I recognize her, but I was trying to make sure I get everybody on the committee. Councilor Albright, are you okay with letting Councilor Kelly comment, and then I'll come back to you?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Councilor Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not on this committee, and tonight was really the first time I was aware that this was something you were considering. So it's new to me. I think I'm missing some of the backstory. I'm unclear about why there's a sense of urgency to move forward with this stage of it when you think there are later iterations, and I don't quite understand that, and why you want to close the public hearing before there's further information come forward. Perhaps Mr. Chair, Councilor Baker, you can explain that a little bit better to me. And also, I do have a question for Ms. Kyra. To the
Well,
best of
wait a
my
minute,
knowledge,
but let me break that into two then.
That's just
The
one.
committee has had an earlier extensive discussion about this issue, and it was a result of that discussion that led to an existing docket item that had been proposed to deal with what you might call the houses that are built up so that they're create problems for their neighbors. And as a result of that presentation, the department indicated that one interim remedy that we could make is to follow the lead of what we had done in the VCOD district, which was to say retaining walls over 4 feet need a special permit. So this is not viewed as a major change, except an extension of something we've already done. We split the item into another component. We retained the main item so that we could deal with the issue much more comprehensively. So the rationale here is that it's not that there is terrible urgency, but there's an opportunity before the committee to take a remedy that we've already undertaken in other parts of the city, apply it here, and then go forward from there. So I hope that's clear on the process. Now, as to your substantive question or comment?
So this is just to make all walls 4 feet or more subject to special permit, and everything else involving height or drainage or whatever else comes up will happen subsequently.
That's correct. This is just we dealt in the VCOD, as I understand it, again, subject to direction by the department, that there was that we passed a special permit requirement for 4-foot retaining walls, and what we're doing here is saying the same thing. Right now, the current ordinance is you need one if you're in the setback, but not if you're not in the setback.
Correct.
So that's the thrust of the chain.
So VOCD did sort of push this forward to now. So thank you for explaining that. I understand. My second question is much less substantial. It's about the building professionals group that Mr. Sangiello and Ms. Kyra mentioned. As far as I'm aware, there were kind of 2 of them. So which is the one, who are the members of the one group that were approached about this and who were in agreement?
Ms. Kyra, can you respond?
Sure. So Lisa Monahan and Jay Walter reached out to us asking us to meet with their group, which we did.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So let me, just to try and shape the discussion, we have, can we take it as a friendly amendment to include the grammatical change that Councilor Krinsman recommended? Does that sense the committee? I don't need to get a vote on that. All right. Second question is whether to recommend adding the word, not recommend, but to, for purposes of our process, to add the word neighborhood in addition to before public. Department feel any views on that?
Can you show that on the screen, please, so we can see how it reads?
Sure. I think that should be possible. Ms. James, can you do that? Okay. It would say adjacent property, comma, the neighborhood or the public. As I
Where are you reading?
in number 2, criterion number 2 that's what I heard Mr. Doringer recommend.
So the proposal is to add the neighborhood, the property, the neighborhood, or the public?
Yes. Okay. Any dissent from that? Is that, members of the committee, is that within our authority? I think it is. Okay. There's one other possible amendment, is that, and that is to add including drainage which I thought was your question. Do you
It
want to make
is,
that
but I don't know
explicit?
how you would do that in this.
Say again?
I'm not sure how you would include drainage.
You would just say an impact adjacent property, including drainage, I think. But maybe we don't need that because it's been discussed, and I think the chair of the committee has indicated some sensitivity to that issue. So I'm not sure we need that amendment, and also it's a little clumsy to insert.
Yeah, it's fine not to
Okay.
insert it.
Okay.
I did have another issue that I thought you were going to call on me after Councilor Kelly.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to clean language and then get to where but I'll come back to you. Okay, and hang on to Councilor Dunberg, and then we'll go to Councilor Albright. Sorry.
So the issue of terracing that was raised by Mr. Sangiolo also interested me because I was rereading the Wellesley bylaw, and they allow, if you do terracing, it says they encourage terracing. And I was curious we're not discouraging it, we're just saying it requires a special permit. But we don't really say what is it about terracing that we don't like. What is it about terracing that we don't like? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't think it's that we don't like terracing, it's that we don't, it's kind of a loophole to the retaining wall height, right? One of the things we're getting at is the overall grading and manipulation of the site. And while terrace walls may look nicer than one solid wall, you can plant sometimes in between, you could still get the same result where you're seeing, major grade manipulation just with a series of smaller walls. So like you said, we're not prohibiting it, but it would require a special permit.
Did you look at the Wellesley bylaw? Because they talk about twice the height of the, if the distance is twice the height, then they don't deal with it.
The distance in between walls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to get complicated for the land use committee if we don't give them some guidance.
Well, that's also the role of staff, right? So we still are providing analysis and memos for every special permit. So the current planning staff will be doing that for each of these. We'll be consulting with engineering for each individual application. They're going to be so site-specific that, we wanted to set a pretty high bar with the criteria, but still keep it broad enough.
Okay.
So I'd like to move this along. We've got other items to discuss. We certainly don't have to act, but is there a motion? I think Councilor Vanberg had indicated you might move the item.
I have a question first,
Oh,
if you would
okay.
indulge me. Go back to the language, please. There's an "and" at the end of number 2 that I think was just added. Was that meant to be added, and are you adding something after that, or was that an error?
That was Councillor Krinsman's request to make it clear that these were all together required.
Okay, so the "and" refers to that there's a number 3.
That's right.
Okay.
Does it?
That you have to meet all three. You
okay.
can't just meet one criteria.
Got it. One other question, that it will not adversely impact adjacent property, neighborhood, or the public. I just want to make sure that this does not cause an issue with the fact that we only notice within 300 feet. And we're now saying that we're going to take into consideration the public. How far asunder does that go?
I'm not sure there's an easy answer for that. Ms. Kyra, I think we always talk about serving the public convenience and welfare, but
Yeah, and one of the things we were thinking of as we wrote this is there's the impact on neighbors. There's also just the impact along the public right-of-way of you know, Brayland is a great example of a sort of dramatic change along the public right-of-way. So that was one of our thoughts in making this a little broader and adding the public. We're not proposing a larger noticing, but we certainly can take into consideration broader implications of these walls in providing analysis to the committee.
Okay, and so do you prefer to leave it where the public, being more general, or do you mean to say, or along the public right away?
I think the public, Ms. Kyra can respond. My own instinct is that public is broad enough. The problem with right-of-way, sometimes they're private ways. That just gets messy, and I think you've got some value here.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Do I hear a motion in favor of the item as amended? Councilor Danberg. Any discussion on the motion? Let's see, all those in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed? Aye. I'm including myself, aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, so I think that's a unanimous recommendation to the committee.
I'm abstaining, Mr. Chair, I'm
Oh,
abstaining.
I'm sorry. Councilor Albright, you're abstaining? Okay,
Yes,
apologies.
thank you.
Apologies.
Do you need the planning board, Mr. Chair?
I believe so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From the planning board, do we have a motion to accept this docket item with the two additions that were made, the and in the neighborhood?
So moved.
All in favor of this? Raise your hands. Okay, that's 5, well, it's me, 6-4. And any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCormick. The confluence of both in-person and virtual is something I'm getting used to, so you're very patient with my process here. Okay, thank you very much. We now have another public hearing item, and I'd like to read this item into the record. This is item 13224, requests for discussion and amendments to Newton Zoning Ordinance Chapter 30. Her Honor the Mayor requesting amendments to the Newton Zoning Ordinance Chapter 30 in order to clarify definitions, edit missing or incorrectly transcribed provisions, and revive inconsistencies in the zoning ordinance and inconsistencies between the zoning ordinance and general ordinances. So we're prepared, I think, again with the presentation. Mr. Lamel, is that you? Or no, Ms. James? Thank you. All right.
Okay, so now we'll look at the next item, which is the zoning ordinance cleanup. So cleaning up the zoning ordinance is something that we do regularly to improve clarity, align language with practice, and to correct inconsistencies. We split these into two separate docket items to help facilitate a more focused discussion. So we have one docket item for formatting and clarity, and then another docket item that is also formatting and clarity, but it's more focused on incentivizing small business. This is the list of the recommendations that we have for the two different docket items. And if there are any specific questions, we are happy to bring up the text of what we're recommending. But these are the items that we're recommending that we make amendments to.
So this is a relatively long list, and I just want to make sure that members of the committee, there was an extensive just memo in the packet about this with a lot of examples and individual information about items. I want to recognize Councilor Wright for clarification then before we go to the public hearing. Councilor Wright?
Thank you. I did bring up in our previous meeting, and I remembered off the top of my head, one issue for cleanup, and I don't see it in the list, and that's in, I think, section 4.2.3, MU3, with special permits. Some places it say 11 stories, some places 5, and that needs to get cleaned up. And I did a while ago, which I couldn't find that email, sent, I believe, a few other just generic cleanups. Should that be included in this?
Who can respond? Mr. Lamel?
Those items were adjusted. So if you go to the zoning ordinance online, those should all be cleaned up already.
I went today and I didn't see it cleaned up. So what the special permit, what's the maximum? I mean, one area said for MU3, one area said 11 stories, and another area said 5 stories.
I believe, do you have the section for that? I mean, because 5 stories is MU4.
423.
Yep. So in MU3, the maximum by special permit, I believe, is 11 stories.
Okay, and then like in the next page or something, it was 5 stories. We can talk about this offline, but I think that's another cleanup that didn't get
I'm
catched.
confident we'll have more than one cleanup vote as part of this process. But I appreciate that very much. Is there any comment on the recommendations here? We had a conversation, just for those who are watching, in committee on these rather extensively before we brought it to the public hearing. So this is not the first time the committee has heard this matter, but I don't want to cut off anybody who has a question. If not, I will open the public hearing and see if there's any comment from the public on this item. And the Planning and Development Board also, I assume, will want to do something similar.
Yeah, I'd like to open the public hearing.
Okay. Is there anyone who wishes to be heard on these items? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing in the committee. Is there a motion to that effect? So moved. From the Vice Chair, a motion to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The public hearing is closed. Mr. McCormick?
Yes, can I have a motion to close the public hearing for the board?
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor of closing the public hearing? Raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, 6-4. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So these items are before us for action. They're complicated, and again, they're very extensive presentation in writing. So I don't want to have anyone feel that they're rushed to do something here, but I think the department went to great pains to show exactly what they were doing. So anyone have any questions or anything in the conversation in committee? If not, I would entertain a motion to recommend approval of the items as presented. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Councilor Kalis moves approval. Any discussion on the motion? So hearing none, I would, I want to make sure, Councilor, yes, Councilor, are there someone, oh, someone's up online. Whose hand is up? Yeah, Mr. Doringer.
So I take it this is a comments for the planning board or more generally, but I had just a couple of thoughts which I've keyed to the memo that was submitted. One is whether during this period when ISD is given discretion over uses that are not explicitly mentioned on use tables and so forth to decide whether they are similar enough to be counted one way or another. I'm wondering if it would not also be a good idea to have the planning department look these over, at least during the period of time when we're kind of learning how these kinds of amendments are working out, what sort of issues are coming up. So that would be one point. The second point is that there's language on page 3, section D, that says that the all information must be provided by applicants. The planning board did have a discussion about the occasions when it would be reviewing projects, and we wanted to make sure that things like shadow studies, which were not listed originally, might be an option. And I think we wouldn't want to lose the discretion to ask for additional information from developers or builders as part of the process. As we get into the specifics of the project. And
Excuse me, Mr. Dorringer, just to be clear, you want to have that discretion to ask for that, or
I think we were told in the discussion with the planning department that they didn't want to kind of enumerate every possible type of information we might be interested in, particularly if we're going to establish conditions. And I think the idea was that we could ask for additional information where shadow studies were just an example, if we felt that a shadow study or something similar was needed by way of additional information in reviewing the project.
So I hear the thrust of your comment is just to make sure that there's additional opportunity for additional information with, it's not foreclosed by the
We wouldn't want to have the submission of the list.
Right.
The listed items preclude us from asking for additional items.
Yeah, my memory is that this list is not exclusive but inclusive, but there is language. Maybe one of the department members can respond to that. Ms. Kyra?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Are you talking about the discretion of the planning board to request additional analysis as part of site plan review?
Yes.
So that is in section 9.29B4(6). Additional, that has the submission requirements. There's a list of requirements, and then it says additional analysis may be required at the discretion of the planning board.
As I hear that from you, Ms. Kyra, that would allow the board to give Mr. Dorringer's example to ask for a shadow study if they felt it was
Correct.
appropriate.
If there was a particular concern regarding shadows, that's certainly something they could request.
Fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is just, it's more of a clarification in the section on making the school versus personal services distinction in, I guess that's section 6.3 quite a few of them there. I'm specifically wondering, are these all concerned with things that are principal uses, not ancillary? I'm thinking, for example, of the person who does tutoring in their home, but it clearly that it's an ancillary use. Is that, I'm just thinking we wouldn't want them to have to get a special permit to do that. But is that because it's only if it was like tutoring Inc. in the neighborhood and as a principal use that they would need that special permit?
And anyone from the department? We talked about this particular item in committee, but maybe the department can clarify.
Sure. So this is essentially a return to how the interpretation of the zoning ordinance before the 2015 recodification, and so that it's not about, I think, ancillary or primary use. That what you had just described is not essentially a for-profit education use. It would be captured in this personal instruction use, and pre-2015 that would have been captured under personal service. And so where the change that's being made is that use and based on use tables allowed by right in certain districts, or allowed by special permit in certain districts based on how that would have been handled pre-2015, basically. But I hope that clarifies it. It's just that we didn't mean to capture certain uses under the for-profit education use, and it's now being kind of readjusted back.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's also a difference with home businesses. So, you know, the intent here is going from everything that was catching a very broad net for-profit school and requiring special permits to really tailoring that more, as Mr. Lamel said, to allow for this sort of smaller personal instruction more easily.
I mean, that's a
Okay,
policy
so-
choice that we have to make, obviously, but that's the recommendation of the department.
So if I was to, I guess my question then remains, if I wanted to do tutoring in my home, do I need a special permit then? Or is that a home business that is otherwise allowed?
I think that would be a home business. I'm
I
getting a
see.
nod yes from the commissioner.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Thank you.
What the commissioner is having an opportunity to do is make classifications and judgments about these very questions, about which it falls into, as I hear it, right? I mean, that's part of what we're doing. So it puts a big burden on the commissioner. But I think that the thrust of the amendment is to reduce the potential requirement for a special permit to those situations which seem to be most appropriate. That's what I heard. Is that correct? Okay. Any further discussion on these? There's a whole lot of things, and we don't have to move them tonight if people want more time to adjust to adjust them. But the memo was quite extensive about this, and we did discuss these in committee, so it's not the first time we've heard this. All right. Anyone wish to move the items?
Move approval.
Say again. Councilor
Councilor
Kritzman?
Kritzman will move approval.
Yes, Councilor Kritzman has moved approval. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstention?
One. Me.
Oh, one abstention. Okay. Councilor Kalis abstained. All right. Thank you very much. So moving on, the next item relates to small businesses, and this is item 13324. This is a request for, yes. Oh, excuse me, I have to
Should
let
we
the
vote on
planning.
that now?
I beg your pardon, I moved too fast. The Planning Development Board has to vote. Apologies. I keep forgetting what's
Thank you.
virtual is not what's in front of me, so the clerk is very good about this, and I'm not as good as she is.
Can I have a motion to approve this docket item, the board?
So moved.
Any discussion or? If so, all in favor of the motion? Say aye, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Baker.
No, thank you, Ms. McCormick, and apologies for my not including that process point. Okay, let's go back. I think we now can talk about this next item. 13324, request for discussion and amendments to Newton Zoning Ordinance Chapter 30 to incentivize small business. Her Honor, the Mayor requesting discussion and amendments to the Newton Zoning Ordinance Chapter 30 in order to incentivize and promote small businesses by allowing home businesses in all residence districts by right, modifying the definition and regulation of educational uses, modifying the definition and regulation of personal services, and including a definition and regulation for personal instruction uses. So that's, that item was discussed earlier on March 11th, and we now have an opportunity to ask questions of the department before I open the public hearing. Are there questions on this set of items? We had a discussion in committee, as you know, but I want to make sure that members of the committee have an opportunity to be heard if there are questions. Councilor Getz.
Now that there's a shift in terms of in the MR districts, so that the dwelling units can each have a home business, are there examples of that existing now that you know of?
Can anyone from the department respond to that question? The Commissioner can respond. The Commissioner of Inspectional Services, welcome to the podium again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what was the question again?
Multiple, businesses in like a two-family, that they exist in each of the properties, each of the units.
So typically, I think for two families, and I'm just going by memory, it would be one per dwelling unit, so it would be one per dwelling unit. Yeah. That does exist, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions for Commissioner or for the department? Okay, do I have a motion on this item? Again, there was an extension memo on this. Councilor Danberg has moved approval. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to vote. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? The ayes have it. Include me in the ayes. And thank you. Planning Development Board. Let me see if I can do this right this time.
Thank you, Chair Baker. Can I have a motion to approve this item from the board?
So moved.
All in favor of this?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Thank you, Chair Baker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now, I think the next items are updates and do not require any public hearing or any vote. Am I correct? I think that's accurate, right? The next items are not, we're not voting anything, there's no public hearing, and we're not anticipating a vote, right? These next two items are informational. Now, we do have to vote the action plan. Beg your pardon, but does the Planning Development Board have to participate in that? Or is that just the?
We've already voted on the action plan.
All right, so we don't need to have your vote, but we do need to hear from Ms. Kreitzer. So this is, let me read this item into the record. This is a request for authorization to submit the fiscal year 2025 annual action plan. Her Honor, the Mayor requesting authorization pursuant to the 2023 revised citizen participation plan to submit the fiscal year 25 action plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the City of Newton Community Development Block Grant and Emergency Solutions Grant funds and the West Metro Home Consortium. And I just note that this needs the approval by the City Council to submit it, but we do not have the authority to amend it. However, I think it's important that we understand what we're voting for. So at that point, I would like to recognize Ms. Kreitzer, who I think is here to explain it. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you. I'm joined tonight. Thank you. Thank you. I'm joined tonight by our Housing Program Manager, Shaylin.
Thank you, Ms. James. Excuse me just a second. I didn't want to, apologies. I just wanted to thank her. Go ahead.
And Shaylin Davis-Ayanako is here as well. I'm happy to give as much or as little information. We have a brief presentation, or I can just answer questions.
I think it would be helpful to the public just to do your presentation briefly, if you would.
Sure. Can I share my? Okay. Okay. So we are here tonight to present our FY25 draft annual action plan for the City of Newton and also for the West Metro Home Consortium. Our federal funds come from 3 federal funding sources. So there's our Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG funds, which provide funding for housing, suitable living environments, and the expansion of economic opportunities for low to moderate income persons. Our Home Investment Partnership Program funds. This is funds that we get through our West Metro Home Consortium. which we are the lead member of, along with 12 other communities. And these provide funds to create affordable housing for low-income households, both through producing new units and rehabilitating affordable housing for rent or home ownership. And also our Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG program, which supports outreach, operations, and improvements of shelters and prevention or rapid rehousing services for homeless and those at risk of homelessness. So we're here tonight as part of our HUD planning process. HUD breaks this process down into 3 steps. There's the 5-year consolidated plan. Newton's consolidated plan, it runs from FY21 to FY25, so we will be looking to update that in the next year. And that provides guidance on how we would like to spend the funding in the future. Our 1-year annual action plan looks at the next fiscal year, in this case FY25, and provides guidance on our plan for how we are going to spend those funds and the programs that we are going to work on. And then the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, or CAPER, is the report that we complete at the end of the fiscal year when the projects are complete, and we report to you and to HUD on how those funds have been spent. So this is our FY25 allocation of funds. One note is that we have not officially heard from HUD what our actual FY25 allocation is. We anticipate that it will be close to level funding for FY24, and so that is what we're planning on. We should have that any day, and we will update at that, but right now we are using our FY24 funds to plan with. So our community development block grant funds anticipate just over $1.8 million. Our home funds for the consortium as a whole is $1.6 million, with $145,225 coming directly to Newton as our entitlement funds. So those are funds that are set aside for Newton projects. The way the consortium works, if communities do not use their entitlement funds, those funds go back into a pool which communities that have projects can compete for. So often we do have access to more funds than are directly allocated to us through the entitlement funds. And then the Emergency Solutions Grant funds include $164,388 for a total of $3.68 million. This next slide shows how our CDBG funds are allocated. We spend 60% of our funds on affordable housing projects and programs, 15% on human service projects, 5% on architectural access, and 20% on program administration. So the annual action plan breaks the work that we propose to do down into goals. We have 5 goals presented tonight. Number 1 is for the affordable housing, to create, preserve, and rehabilitate safe, decent, and affordable rental and ownership housing and provide financial support to income-eligible first-time homebuyers. We have a couple examples here of projects that we anticipate working on in FY25. The West Newton Armory, which we just showed an image of, hopes to start construction in 2025 and to be completed in 2026. That's a 100% affordable development. The West Newton Family Navigation Center, which we're putting $750,000 in CDBG funds in for accessible access to this building from the street. That is also anticipated to begin this spring, summer for completion later this year. Two Life Communities Coleman House, which is a 100% affordable senior living facility, which has been under construction for a few years now and is nearing completion. Our Down Payments Assistance Program for first-time homebuyers, which provides up to $10,000 grants to first-time homebuyers who are low or moderate income and meet our funding requirements. And our Housing Rehabilitation Program, which provides loans to low and moderate income households that need to make improvements to their houses or repairs to their houses. It also provides funding to our local nonprofits, the Newton Housing Authority, organizations such as Pathway to Possible, Second Step, who have facilities where people are sheltered or renting house units and need some work done on those. We also have 2 potential projects listed here. Additional units for the Newton Housing Authority's management portfolio. They have a large number of units scattered all over the city. that need regular maintenance and work, and when possible, we assist them with those projects. And the Hancock and Grove Street parcel redevelopment, which is also known as the Walker Street project. These are the city-owned buildings, 3 city-owned homes that the city purchased with ARPA funds. We've working with the reuse committee at this time to look at the possibility of reusing those units as affordable housing. Our second goal is fair housing. We're to continue to educate the community about fair housing laws. And to do that, we're working with, in collaboration with the Fair Housing Committee and the Home Consortium to increase knowledge about fair housing laws and obligations. We're continuing to implement our analysis of impediments report. We're continuing to work on our fair housing testing program, which was initiated by the consortium and is working on its second year of testing in Newton as well as the rest of the consortium communities, and considering policy changes related to the findings of our MAPC parking utilization study. And I'll turn this over now to Shaylin to continue.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So our third goal is the provision of human services. These grants provide financial support for projects in the Newton community that directly provide stability to Newton residents across their lifespan, specifically targeting low to moderate income Newton residents. And on the next slide, you'll see the recommended projects for this year. There's, I think, 14 total that deal with financial aid for childcare programs, emergency grants for folks paying their utility bills through the Cousins Fund, as an example. There are a couple of resident services programs through NCDF and the Newton Housing Authority. There are funding for social workers and clinicians at different agencies like Pathway to Possible, Riverside Community Center, the Second Step. Big, wide breadth of programs that are funded through the Human Service Program, and the grants range from $10,000 to $50,000 annually. We're expecting about $307,000 to be allocated to this program. Again, like Laura mentioned at the beginning, that's subject to change based on what our allocation from HUD is. And then the fourth goal is the goal for supportive services for folks either experiencing or at risk of homelessness. This is through our Emergency Solutions Grant and provides supportive services specifically for individuals and families who are either experiencing or who are at risk of homelessness. And this can include financial support for rent, for utilities, and also for existing emergency and transitional housing. So if you'll go to the next slide, the ESG grant, there will be 4 grants made this year to the Community Day Center in Waltham and Reach Beyond Domestic Violence as our emergency shelter component. The homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing grants are made to the Brookline Center for Community Mental Health for their homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing programs. And just important to note, while CDBG specifically serves Newton residents, ESG is able to support projects and programs in Brookline, Newton, Waltham, and Watertown. And then the 5th goal is the provision of architectural access. So that's the removal of material and architectural barriers restricting mobility and accessibility for folks with a disability. And this is through public thoroughfares, public buildings, parks and recreational facilities, and other nonprofit agencies. And this year's project is to create pedestrian improvements at the 5-way intersection of Langley Road, Sumner Street, and Beacon Street. This will use old funding too, so FY24 and FY25 funds will be put into this project, as well as ARPA funds, and this is set to start in FY25. Lastly, HomeARP. This is a supplemental grant that the West Metro Home Consortium was awarded in 2021. Some background, we were awarded as a consortium $5.4 million. This grant specifically targets folks, individuals and families, I should say, who are either experiencing or are at risk of homelessness and other vulnerable populations as well. We submitted an allocation plan to HUD that was approved in June, and that allocation plan dictated how the funds were going to be spent based across a couple of eligible categories. We went through a needs assessment and gap analysis last fall, and the consortium made the final vote last February to allocate 47% of the funding, or a little over $2.5 million, to affordable rental housing, $1 million, or 18% of the funding, to non-congregate shelter development, $750,000, or 14%, to supportive services, $300,000, or 6% of the funding, to tenant-based rental assistance, and a little over $800,000, or 15%, to the administration and planning of the HomeArt program. An RFP was released for these funds on November 9th and was left open for 2 months. And over the course of those 2 months, my colleague Nika Sandel and myself held 8 technical assistance sessions for applicants who were looking to apply, as this is a brand new grant. And we'll go through the awards that were made on the next slide here.
I think
So
you
there were
could
no
summarize
applications for
those a
non-congregate-
little if you want. Carry on.
Oh, sorry. Thank
No,
you.
no.
So there were no applications for the non-congregate shelter component. And instead of re-releasing that RFP, the consortium voted to reallocate the funding. So another $200,000 went into the rental housing pot for a total of $2.7 million. And then $400,000 was added to TBRA, and $400,000 was added to the supportive services funding pot. And you'll see, oh, sorry, Laura, will you go back one slide? Thank you. So you'll see the Framingham Housing Authority was awarded funding for their Carlson Crossing East project. West Newton Armory was awarded funding. There was a project in Needham and a project in Wayland as well under the rental housing funding recommendations. Under TBRA, most of these programs will serve the consortium as a whole, not just 1 or 2 communities within the consortium, which is great. There are a couple that will only serve 1 community within the consortium, and those are the lower awards generally under TBRA. But some of those, again, are Metro West received $120,000 for their emergency rental assistance program.
Let me just comment. I think you don't have to read through all of them because we can see them, but I hope we can carry on if you don't mind a little bit.
Sure. And then the next slide just shows the supportive services funding recommendations as well. A lot of similar agencies, and these are for supportive services, so case management, funding, anything like that, really. And lastly, just HomeArt funds need to be fully expended by June 30th, 2030.
Super. All right, thank you. Is there anything else on that?
No, that covers it.
Okay. I have a lot of wonderful ways to take care of people. Any questions for members of the committee or the Councilor Albright? We'll have a copy of this in our report, right?
So we got an email, I think it was last week, from someone that said that Second Step got $1 million grant. Do we really need to give them CDBG funds? So I thought I would just raise that tonight.
So this is not something we can modify, but do you want to respond to Second Step?
So that came up at the Planning and Development Board's meeting, and the executive director of Second Step was there. The funding that they're receiving is specifically for certain services that they provide, not to residents, but to people who come to their program for services. They did get a grant. It's a one-time grant. It was not, I got the impression it wasn't expected, and they hadn't decided how they were using those funds. But we did discuss this and decided we did not feel it was right to penalize them for having the good luck of receiving additional funding. They're an excellent institution. They're a local institution that does great work. They're great at reporting and working with our programs. So,
Thank you. So the accessibility project in Newton Center, How did the Commission on Disability approve that? I mean, how did you pick that particular spot?
I'm sorry, Councilor Albright, you had two questions. How did the disability?
Well, the overall question is, how did that accessibility project get selected?
Okay,
I can comment on that.
okay, certainly. Councilor
Would you like
Danberg?
me to comment
Yeah,
on
if you
that?
can.
Yes. Thank you for asking that question, Councilor Albright. This area has been looked at and talked about in the Commission on Disability and among the Ward 6 counselors for many years. Also, the Commission on Disabilities and I believe another group got together and offered the opportunity for counselors and other people, other members of the public, to get into a wheelchair and try and negotiate certain places. And this was one of the areas that we had to try and negotiate, and it's impossible to negotiate safely in a wheelchair. A number of years ago, not that far back, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a suggestion of an offer by the city of $100,000 to put paint onto this Langley-Sumner Beacon area. We decided to turn that offer down because we knew that if it were painted, that fix would have to last for probably decades, and no other funds would go into it. It turned out to be a good move because we now have received these funds earmarked for this project, and it is going to fix one of the worst and most highly used areas in Newton because of its proximity to the Newton Center T station and how many people with disabilities and in wheelchairs and with mobility issues use that triangle of area. So I'm thrilled to hear that that's going to start in 2025, and that is a little bit of the history on why that area was selected.
Thank you, that was helpful, Councilor Danberg. Could I ask a couple of other quick questions?
Yeah, we have a lot to cover, so go ahead, but let's see if we can.
I guess you didn't end up funding this, but what is non-congregate shelters? What are they? What's a non-congregate shelter?
It's a temporary living space for folks experiencing homelessness, but they have their own living space. So they have their own room, they have their own bathroom in most situations. They generally don't have their own kitchen or any space like that, but they have a private space for themselves.
Okay, and another quickie is the difference between rental housing and tenant-based rental housing.
Good question. So rental housing is for the development or acquisition of affordable rental housing specifically. Tenant-based rental assistance provides rental assistance to tenants in affordable housing often, or market rate housing if it fits the criteria required by HUD.
I didn't catch the first one. Could you do that one again, the rental-based housing?
So rental housing under HomeARP specifically is for the development and acquisition of affordable rental housing.
Okay.
So actually developing the units.
Okay.
Tenant-based rental assistance just provides rental assistance to tenants.
Okay, that's good. And the last quick question is, what happens if the JAPG on the Walker project doesn't recommend making those two houses into affordable housing? Would that money just go into some other category?
Did you hear the question?
So I can answer that. So while we're hoping that will be a project in the future, we haven't set any specific funds aside for it yet, because that's still a few years down the road at its soonest. So
Okay.
if that is not recommended, then we'll find another use for those
There's
funds.
plenty of time to obligate that money to something else?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilor Danberg? And I want to move along.
Thank you. 3 quick questions or comments also. Question on the Home ARP funds that need to be used by 2020. Does that mean, Lara, that these are one-time funds and that we have that window that in order to use those funds, or do we have other opportunities between now and 2030 to apply for this type of funding?
I believe these are one-time funds, but I'm going to turn this to Shaylin.
Thank you. Yes, this is a one-time grant. This is not like the regular home allocation we've received annually. This is a one-time grant that we received for $5.4 million and have until 2030 to spend.
Okay. And my last question is, on the down payment assistance program for low-income individuals, for first-time buyers, is there any time limit for which the recipient must hold that property? Or if they sell it, is there any requirement that it be paid back? Or is this a grant that has no requirements attached?
It's a grant of funds. Any unit that we use with this is an affordable unit. So there's no requirement that they live there, but it is already restricted.
Okay, so the grant is for a unit that would be affordable in perpetuity anyway. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to move this along. We got several other items. Councilor Kalis.
Quick question. So when we grant money to affordable housing, is it at any level of affordability? Do you ever go lower than 80%?
Often we do. So for CDBG, the units need to be restricted at or below 80% of AMI. For home, they need to be restricted at or below 65% of AMI. And there are often situations where the units are restricted at either 50% or sometimes 30%, as is the case with the Newton Armory as an example.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed? Any abstention? Thank you very much. And thank you very much for taking the time to present, both of you. We appreciate
Thank you.
that. And the PowerPoint slides will be part of our report. Okay, so they go into quite a bit of detail. The next item is an update. This is, I think we are now through all the items that we have to vote, right? Is that correct? We've now done the voting items tonight. We're now discussing. So the next item is 2324. This is an update on short-term rental ordinance compliance and enforcement. The item is Councilors Maliki, Wright, Kelly, Laredo, Lipoff, Humphrey, Lucas, Albright, Danberg, and Oliver requesting an update on short-term rental ordinance compliance and enforcement, including data on registrations, complaints, investigations, and fines issued, types of violations being found, e.g. non-owner occupied, room limits, annual term limits, other code violations like noise, health, safety, and trash, ability to compare short-term rentals registered with the city versus registered with the state versus listing on public platforms, ability to obtain listing information from short-term rental companies, adequacy of resources or other obstacles to enforcement. And we are joined by the Commissioner of Inspectional Services, who I think, along with the Planning Department, who is going to present the response to this.
Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and kind of give the update to the Zoning and Planning Committee.
This is, sorry, Mr. Lee. I recognize you. Thank you.
So the Law Department worked closely with ISD with regards to, this update. And if you all recall at the last Zoning and Planning Committee where this matter was taken up, the request to ISD was to identify parts of the short-term rental ordinance that might be able to be tweaked or updated to better allow them to enforce the ordinance. Because they did represent to the Zoning and Planning Committee, there are problems with enforcement, and the two main ones that were identified during discussions were first identifying the responsible party. And what I mean by that is the commissioner can expand on this, but as they were doing enforcement, they often found a lot of people pointing fingers at each other, specifically leasees, as well as owners, saying that, I'm not the one in custody of the property, or I'm not responsible in putting it onto the other. So that's one item that we do have a proposal for with regards to how this is going to be addressed. And it's fairly straightforward, but it does get to the root of it, which is making the operator, which right now currently can be a leasee or the owner, only the owner. And also making clear in the ordinance that the owner is ultimately responsible for the use of the property. That will cut through all of the issues that ISD is having with regards to this concern about identifying who is responsible, because the ordinance sets out very clearly who it is. It would be the owner of the property, and we would know who that is. The second item that ISD really had some problems with enforcement was identifying exactly what violation arise to the level where they can start enforcement and issue fines. And what I mean by this is they had a lot of trouble with regards to advertisements for properties that are available in Newton for short-term rentals, and then actually being able to identify that property as one that's truly being rented. And the solution here, what's being proposed, is making it clear with regards to how the advertisement itself can actually be the violation. And the proposal for how to handle that is the same as several communities that are nearby. And it's a requirement that any advertisement for short-term rental in Newton, on the actual advertisement itself, it needs to identify a registration number that's going to be issued by the city. Meaning that if a short-term rental property is registered with the city, they're issued a registration number, and then they have to post it on the advertisement so that people can see it. It's easy to identify who's in compliance and who is not. Therefore, if you have a advertisement for short-term rental and it's missing that number from the city, that identification number, that is a per se violation by itself. So through discussions with ISD, these proposals, we worked through how it could operate. And ISD at least is confident that these minor tweaks will have a substantial effect in terms of ease for enforcement and how quickly they're going to be able to respond if there's a short-term rental that's not compliant with the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Now, Commissioner, do you wish to add anything to that? Thank you. Questions, Councilor Albright.
So
Yeah,
am
Councilor
I
Wright.
remembering correctly that these short-term rentals have to be owner-occupied? Okay.
Yes.
So today, oddly enough, it was just today on a walk, I ran into a house in my ward where there were 5 college students renting a house. The owners moved out in January, and it's an Airbnb house apparently, but they're renting it for the semester. And there's another rental unit within the house, so the owner is not living there. And they tell me that it will be, they told me more than they should have told me, that's for sure. But how do you know, these things are happening?
So I mean, I'll let the commissioner speak to it or expand on it, but it is still complaint driven. I don't know if what you're describing even constitutes short-term rental. It might
Yeah,
be
that
long-term.
almost sounded like they were renting it for the semester, which wouldn't be a short-term
Right.
rental.
Well, it's advertised on Airbnb, that's how they found it.
Well, Airbnb also advertises apartments for over 30 days also in mid.
So this wouldn't cover the situation where these students are living there for 4 months?
No.
And when it gets turned into an Airbnb for short-term rental in the summer, which was the next step, that's when you would pick it up?
Yes, if that was the case, if they did rent it as a short-term rental.
But you wouldn't know about it unless somebody picked up the phone and called you?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
I think also it may have in that particular case, the limit of 4 unrelated
Yeah.
people, and so there's.
Oh, yes, but we were talking about short-term rentals, so
Right,
that's
no,
what I was
that's
trying
an
to make the
independent violation, so-
distinguish.
Okay.
Councilor Wright.
So I get a lot of the complaints in the short-term rentals, and I really like the idea that if they don't have the registration, then you can, notice them. So are you gonna, and maybe this is Mr. Lee, are you gonna notice them, give them a warning once or a fine? How are you gonna go about that?
We're gonna follow the tiers that's in the ordinance, which is, I believe, the first violation is a notification, and then it gets tiered up, increasing amount of fines per continuing violation.
I guess the question is, you've described, Mr. Lee, just to follow up with you and the commissioner, these two modifications in the ordinance. When is the language, you say you're working on it? Do you have a sense of when you'll be ready?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I should have mentioned that we will have red lines as well as a memo explaining exactly what these changes are. Not at the next ZAP meeting, because I believe that's the budget, but I believe the meeting after that.
Okay, because I'd like to, unless the committee feels otherwise, I think these are modifications we should move on. Any questions? Excuse me.
So can I just?
Yes,
So
Councilor
to follow up on the registration in the advertisement, so will you actually look at the Airbnb advertisements to see if there's a registration number? Or?
No, we're not going to comb the Airbnb ads, or there are several different types of rental, short-term rental sites. So no, it'll still be a complaint-based enforcement.
Oh, okay.
I have some residents that will do this, and I do it too. So there'll be enough people going through this. But there's other platforms we don't know about, and that's another problem.
Right.
And
one other comment I would just make is that we found that the tiered approach was not as effective as in the leaf blower enforcement as just having a flat fine. So you knew if somebody changes the name, the identity, the ownership, and somebody says, I'm the Amalgamated Limited Partnership, and the next one is the Amalgamated 2 Limited Partnership, that kind of thing. So I would just encourage you and Mr. Lee to look at the question of the fine structure as well. But it would be great to get those back and get them underway. Any other comments? Councilor Maliki, I'm sorry, thank you.
Oh, thank you. My question might be sort of moot at this point, because I was wondering what if somebody put in a fake registration number, but I guess it'll be up to the people who are checking the ads to look up the number on the city website. And I'm still, I haven't looked lately. This is for Mr. Ciccarello, have there been any more registrations than there were before? Because the number seemed very small in relation to the number of listings one sees.
Not that I can tell.
Okay. And nobody had any comment on the changing, what was the wording, owner or operator to just owner? Are there any risks to that, or basically I'm hearing you say it just makes it clearer, so nobody can point fingers and say it's the other guy's fault?
Councilor Maliki, I don't know what you mean by risks, but it would certainly reduce the number of properties that could qualify as a short-term rental, because if you're the leasee, you can't be the operator. It has to be the owner.
Okay. Oh, so even to have a short-term rental, you'd have to be the owner of the building that your apartment is in, or the condo, or whatever it is.
Correct.
Okay.
You could be the owner of the unit. That's fine too.
Okay. And does it help in any way with the question of owners saying they live there when they really don't?
Saying that they live there, it does, in the sense that now ISD doesn't have to look at leases, doesn't have to look at, is it someone who the owner has given permission to live there that is now acting as the operator. So it makes it more simplified in the sense that the ISD will only have to look at, okay, well, you own the property, you pay the taxes on it, and then it limits the number of people ISD has to determine if they live there or not. So the short answer to your question is yes, it should make it easier.
Okay. And is the resident extract or listing of residents, is that a useful, guide to who's living in someplace, or not, because it's only every January 1 that it gets updated?
I'm sorry, could you say that again, please?
The listing of residents, I mean, that's, I assume we don't like double list people. They can only live at one place. So is that a useful guide for determining if somebody who owns a property actually lives there?
Yes, we'll be looking at the assessments and things like that.
Okay, well,
I
I'm
think
not
we've
on the committee, but I support you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councilor Danberg.
If there are no further comments or questions, I am prepared to move to hold, since we would like in the future to have another update on this.
Okay, thank you. There's a motion to hold. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Lee. We look forward to the actual language. This will be an important step forward. It doesn't mean it's the only one, but we would like to see that when we can get it done. Thank you for coming tonight. Okay, the next two items are companion items, so I'm going to put them together for purposes of our discussion. This is 8524, request for discussion and possible amendments to enhance the preservations of existing homes, and 4124, amend the setbacks in multi-residence zones to encourage preservation of existing buildings. Both of these have extensive docket language, but the basic question here is, we've talked about these before in committee, and we have a presentation, and this is basically the question of what happens to buildings that are torn down and then are rebuilt at much more expensive scale. And Mr. Lamel, you're going to do this one?
I am.
Okay. So Mr. Lamel is going to take us through what he has found so far.
Right, and so this presentation was in the packet, and I'm just going to go through it fairly quickly here. But following up from our last conversation, the plan and the directive was to look a bit more closely at the teardowns and the new development that has occurred. If you go to the next slide. Look at what other communities allow in terms of their development potential for single and two-family homes, and if there are other communities that have taken action, essentially reducing the size of the allowed development for single and two-family homes, or something in that realm. And so what we came to as a kind of final data set is about 500 projects. These have to be for what we kind of narrowed our scope into is by right development of 1 and 2 family homes that are replacing other 1 or 2 family homes. So we're not looking at special permits. We're not looking at a commercial use being torn down and replaced with residential. It's just 1 and 2 units being replaced by 1 and 2 units. And just the reason why there isn't closer to 600 projects over this time period, because again, the teardowns are really consistent at about 100 a year, is that we needed to have the new development data in the assessor's database, and that doesn't get updated all the time. And so if there was a 2022 demolition, it's possible that the new construction hasn't finished up yet, or that it just hasn't been input into the assessor's database. And the takeaways here, I don't think are anything earth-shattering, but essentially what we're seeing is that relative to 1 and 2 family parcels, so SR and MR properties with 1 or 2 family homes on them, the teardowns are occurring on parcels that are larger than those across the city. So again, there's a greater development potential. The existing home is smaller than typical homes across the city, so that delta is greater, and likewise there's a lower assessed value. So again, that delta is greater for the new development to occur. And just the fourth point is that single-family homes that are being torn down are a bit newer. They're post-war construction, typically, whereas most single-family homes in Newton are pre-war. And these are just the details of that. So what you can see here is that the lot sizes for the teardowns on the right are bigger than the citywide median parcel size. So again, when you do lot size times the FAR, you get more square footage allowed. So this is looking at the gross living area. This is essentially looking at adding up a few data points in the assessor's database. This is essentially finished square footage. So it includes finished attic space, it includes finished basement space. But what you're seeing here is that all the way on the right are the new developments occurring on teardowns. And what you can see that existed in 2017, those are typically smaller than what exists across the city. And just real on that last slide there, just a point here is that a lot of this square footage in the new construction that's happening on teardowns is happening in basements. So if you look at the pre-development or pre-teardown homes in the assessor's database, in the finished basement category, there's really little space. I think what we talked about earlier regarding retaining walls and how all of this is interconnected, developers, builders are finding ways to maximize every possible square foot for livable, habitable space, and then selling that. So yeah, next slide. And just again, the values here, there's a great value creation that's happening for the new development parcels. And what you're seeing is that the homes that existed before the new development have a lower value than those in general across the city. And my colleague or my predecessor, Rachel Nadkarni and James Fries and others looked at kind of this multiplier. If you could increase the value of a home by 2.4 of the assessed value, it would be a good candidate for teardowns. And what you're seeing is that across, whether it's a single family, a two family, or a 2-unit condo, the value creation is between 2.7 and 3.7. So really, you're well above that minimum.
Could I just ask a clarifying question? So in that chart there, the 2017 is the 2017 value of the house, of the average value of those?
In fiscal year 24 dollars, but yes.
Okay, say that again, because I'm trying to understand this.
So it's the value of the home in 2017, but adjusted for inflation so that it's apples to apples.
So the condominium, in the condominium that says 825,000, that's FY24 numbers?
It's the 2017 number adjusted for inflation, just so you're looking at an apples to apples comparison.
Oh, so it might have been lower than that, but you adjusted it up to make...
The actual number is a little bit lower, correct?
Okay, and that, okay. Is that that's a before number or?
That's essentially the tear down, the pre-new construction.
Okay.
So what you're seeing is that a typical, let's use the 2-family, for example. A 2-family home is being purchased, is valued at, almost, is at $850,000, and the new development is almost at a little over $2.3 million.
Okay.
And just to clarify, in the case of a 2-family, is that the value of the whole structure or the value of each unit?
Each of these is the structure. So the 2-family is in the assessor's database, the value, there's one value.
Yeah.
Condominiums are split, and so the condominium values are added together.
Okay, thank you.
And just what I wanted to highlight here with this example, and the next example is you've got 2 properties. This is 100 and 102 Langley Road. Well, this is one, and we'll go to the next one, where the home was torn down. You had about 4,000 square feet of finished space, and afterwards, you have about double that at 8,000 square feet of finished space. And again, not all of that counts towards FAR. Again, that livable space, a lot of that is, or some of that is basement, which wouldn't be captured. And all that is to say here, if you go to the next slide, I think what we want to be getting at as we go to the next steps here is where are there situations where there are good tear downs and where are there situations where there are bad tear downs. And I think what's happening here is you have a loss of kind of mature landscape and vegetation. So there's a really big change. The overall mass of the building is greatly increasing, and that mass in particular is pushed up to the street. So relative to the home before, a lot of this, you've lost these mature trees, and a large portion of the home, much more than was before, is pushed up and very visible, which I would say are not great examples or not great characteristics. Next slide. And this is really just to get at that size is not everything, right? Just reducing FAR, just changing height or retaining walls, or all these things that are planning on doing aren't going to get at the issue. So this is in a situation where the finished space is drastically increasing as well. It's more than doubling, but you wouldn't know it necessarily from the street. So again, this is getting bigger percentage-wise than the last one we saw, but I think we can all agree that it doesn't appear that way from the street. And if you go to the next slide, these are the site plans. What you're seeing is that the facade of the home is basically being maintained. The additional massing is being put in the rear. There's not in the same vein as a loss of mature landscaping or trees or major grading changes. So again, what you're seeing from the street is not very different than what was there before, even though the home is more than doubling. And just we can think about all those things as we go to the next step and eventually look towards recommendations. So the next piece of it was looking at what other communities allow in terms of size of buildings for their single and two family homes. So looking at single family homes and just looking at Newton, Lexington, Needham, Wellesley, and Brookline, every community calculates square footage differently. So Newton is FAR based, Lexington is a gross floor area calculation. Needham it has FAR in some districts, but not in all districts. Wellesley has a large home review trigger at certain points. And so take this with a grain of salt, but essentially trying to get you to something reasonable. What you're seeing here is for single family homes, smaller lots, Newton allows a little bit less than some of our other communities. And as we start to get to the larger lots, we typically allow a little bit more by right. And Wellesley, just as a highlight, they have their large home review. That's not necessarily a special permit, but it's additional level of review that I just wanted to kind of capture in this chart. And then two family, again, you can just take a look at these numbers as well. Brookline, just as a side note, is a little bit skewed because they have some zones that allow for an FAR of 1, but these lot sizes, 20,000, 25,000, 15,000, they just don't exist. So I don't want you to think that there's 15,000 square foot two family homes popping up in Brookline. It's just the formula. And then where communities have taken action, we go to the next. So Needham in 2017 implemented FAR in one of their residential districts. And most recently, I think they just had a hearing last week with their planning board, not to further lower FAR, but what they're finding is that, and I think similar to Newton, there's a lot of square footage that's being developed that doesn't count towards FAR. So they're looking at potentially adjusting what is and is not captured in their definition of floor area ratio, and therefore overall reducing the amount that's allowed. Lexington, at the end of last year, essentially reduced the amount of gross floor area. They changed their formula. The one on the left is what they allowed previously. The one on the right is their new formula. So you can see just basically on small lots, a 5% decrease in allowable floor area and up to a little over 20% when you get to these larger lots over 30,000 square feet. This was approved at the end of last year. So to be determined what will happen. But again, I think as you saw from the square footage, they still allow a significant amount of square footage that's in line with what Newton allows, even with the decrease. And just another piece, a bit on the other side of the country, to say that there are communities, and this is more in the MRT VCOD realm work, where they reduce the allowed size of single-family homes and created a tiered system where multifamily, small multifamily infill would be allowed, but still limited in size. Next slide. Slide, just thinking about where we're going to go from here. Like I said, I think we can look a little bit closer at good and bad teardowns, look for commonalities and characteristics that we could then turn into recommendations. But as we get towards these recommendations, making it clear that we would like to be receiving input from the committee, and then taking that out to the community and the broader public, given that these types of changes would impact the vast majority of the city, and want to make sure that these get properly portrayed. That's what I have.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Millell. Comments or questions from the committee? First, Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to do my comments on the presentation. I'll let other people do comments, and then I have another page of comments. So just going through the presentation, there's a lot of data, but I'd like to see some more that I think would be even better pertaining. And like on page 3, the key takeaways here, what I'd like to see is with tear downs, what they're building, how close to the FAR maximum are they? And I know when I was doing this data a few years ago, many developers, not all, but many are within 10 feet of the FAR maximum. So they're just trying to maximize that. So having some of that data, for me saying, well, maybe we need to change the FAR. And I have different ideas on that too, which I'll come to later. So I had a question on page 5 on the 2 families, the tear downs from 2017 to 2024. The size has over doubled in that. Any reason why, or is it just that's what builders are doing, just building as big as they can?
Well, all of them are more than doubling, I'd point out. But the 2 family, I think, is skewed just because there aren't as many entries. I think if you're tearing down and providing 2 units, the vast majority are condominiums. And I think if you go to slide 2, you can see that the teardowns, before the teardown, there were 67 2 families, and then when you get to the end, there's only 27.
I assume that that's because they went to condos.
Exactly right.
And so then on page 6, and where they're selling between 2.7 and 3.7, where 2.4 is the threshold. That seems to be driven by size. Is that correct? So reducing size would reduce that, how much they would make? Right. Is that true? Page 6?
I mean, I think they're selling at a per square foot, and so reducing square foot would reduce costs.
Yeah. And then your example on page 9, which is more, it wasn't a tear down, it was an adaptive reuse, which I think most people want to see the adaptive reuse, and it's keeping the streetscape. So I thought what we're trying to do here is reducing, it's not stopping tear downs, and some houses do need to be torn down, but I think we'd rather get to adaptive reuse than tear downs, and especially as the earlier example showed, how much trees we've lost with the tear downs.
Right, we have different members of the committee who want to speak too, and so I just want to just get a sense of where you are, and then we'll go on.
Okay, so some of the things going to the few of the other ones is like, I like, you know, Wellesley, large house review, and I also like, I think Lexington, where for a tear down, and again, I see it more as a tear down versus adaptive reuse. For a tear down, I think I'd like to see, you got to use new lot standards. So that means new lot setbacks and things like that. And also maybe bring in the Lexington FAR where it decreases for a tear down versus adaptive reuse, because I think we want to incentivize adaptive reuse and not tear down. And then the last slide that was in there for Portland, Oregon, I don't see how that addresses tear downs. That's talking about missing middle, but what we were trying to do is reduce tear downs, and I don't think what's here is helping in reducing tear downs. And I'll let other people go, and then I have some more suggestions, and I'll talk
Okay.
at the end.
We'll
Thank
come
you.
back. I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance. We go to Councilor Danberg, then Councilor DeKalis.
Thank you, Mr.
and
Chair.
Councilor Albright. Thank you.
First of all, on the 100-100 to Langley Road, I want to point out that, yes, prior to the tear down, it was a total of 4,100 square feet. After 8,000, it doubled in size, but it did not double in the number of units. And I think one of the tragedies in this type of tear down and rebuild is that this is less than 1 block from the Newton Center T-stop, and yet we're producing 4,000 square foot condos instead of multi-unit, smaller multi-unit, walkable to the T. We've got to do something about incentivizing more units that are smaller. I don't have such an antipathy toward the building itself, although it has denuded the property of all of the beautiful trees that were there. If it were at least 4 units, I would not feel so badly about this, but I think this was an example of a tragedy that we need to fix. And my second comment is about the Portland, Oregon page, and I like the idea of 2, 3, and 4 unit homes having greater allowed size on a given lot than a single family home. This de-incentivizes single family construction and incentivizes more smaller units that house more people, that reduce the size of each unit, and that use the land more efficiently. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Kalis, and then I'll go to Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Chair. I believe that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what Councilor Danberg just brought up about that 4,000 square foot house would now be under VCOD, right?
I believe that was included and is in the MRT district, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So that's good. So understanding that we just passed the VCOD, but we haven't seen yet, development. I'd like to definitely see what comes out of that. But I want to be very clear that I agree with what Councilor Wright was talking about, and about reuse, not tearing down and rebuilding. There are circumstances where I think if it's multi-units, that could work. But even in Ward 8, I'm seeing tear downs and shoehorning in multi-use complexes that just change the fabric completely of the area. And I'd like to see what happens in all of these areas that we just rezoned VCOD, and for now, really try to incentivize maintaining these small houses if we can and not tearing them down. That's it.
Okay, Councilor Getz, and then, excuse me, Councilor Albright, I recognize you first, now come to Councilor Getz.
Okay, thank you. So I do like the Needham and the Lexington approaches. I mean, we have a lot to learn about it, but those approaches seem to be useful. And the Portland, I forget the example that you gave us where there was two houses that from the street looked the same, but all the development was in the back. It seems like that's what the Portland solution is aiming towards, because it's becoming larger, but it's becoming well, I don't know if it's multi-unit or what it is, but that would be one way to achieve a multi-unit house so if there's a way when you're working on this to not let them go encroach on the street or encroach on the side setbacks, but only go out in the back, that whatever you do, if that is a way to do it, it would help. But it does affect the neighborhood, the back, the people in the back and the people on the sides are going to have encroachments, so we have to be careful of that as well. It's clearly a very complicated solution, but it would be interesting to really study the Needham and Lexington solutions and see how they dealt with those issues of and in Portland also, did they deal with the encroachment in the back and the sides? And I wasn't sure, Councilor Kalis, what you meant. Did you mean multifamily or multi-use when you said that? You said they were getting a lot of multi-use projects. Did you mean multifamily?
They're yeah.
So that's what the Portland solution would lean towards. So I guess you need to think about, if we're looking to increase the number of multifamily units, then think about a way to do it that doesn't change the character of the neighborhood. That would be one way to think about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Getz.
Many thanks for this initial work. It's giving us the pulling back and starting to look at this issue. I'm really very interested in finding out, when the FAR working group established a higher FAR on the smaller lots, the effect of that, in terms of the amount of new build that was happening, because I've seen that quite a bit of that happening around us. And like I'm thinking specifically of Fuller Street. And some of the adjoining streets, because this was an MR district, and then boom, a lot more massing and a lot more build was allowed on those lots. So it's the increase in the FAR in that time period and the effect of that.
You mean FAR, just so the public understands what you mean.
Correct.
Sorry.
Yeah. And then I like the Needham solution of capturing more of the habitable space to be included in the FAR calculations, because I think that that's actually going to be helpful. And then I appreciate what Councilor Wright had suggested in terms of new lot standards for a tear down, just in terms of trying to control, the new build. And I would really love to have a conversation with ISD, what is practiced in terms of what's done with capturing pre-existing property rights. I've seen on numerous occasions where they actually capture the existing building footprint or hardscape. So that's a question I think for Andrew Lee, but that's the piece that I think a lot that we don't understand or appreciate, and I think it would be good to have that, so that we understand where we can and can't go.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, you're asking if someone buys a non-conforming structure and tears it down, what are their rights to rebuild?
Right, and where on the lot.
And where on the lot.
Just in terms of that pre-existing right.
Yeah. And maybe that's an issue to flag.
Yeah. And then lastly, is there any way to incentivize demolition through the cost of demolition? I know that we're pretty maxed out and our demolition costs are pretty comparative to, abutting communities, but I would really like to know, whether or not there is a way to actually make the number in terms of like the cost of demolition to be, comparable to what it actually environmentally costs, and to incentivize not demolitioning, the demolition of the property. Thank
Okay.
you.
Other people on the committee who haven't spoken? I just want to, if I can, and I'll come back to you, Councilor Wright, I want to just add a couple of thoughts. I tend to share Councilor Kalis's view that I want to see what happens with the VCOD in the multi-unit replacement, because I think that gives us a test drive. But I am encouraged by some of the things you've been finding, and I hope that you can continue to look at the situation so that we can try and screen out those circumstances which really are out of scale. And this is independent of obviously the grade change one. That's a whole other issue. But it seems that a good deal of the new construction is finished basements, which are adding significant volume at the same time. And that may be a change just in a measurement without changing the basic FAR that will make an important difference. So I think that as you go forward, I would think there may be, like we're beginning to see with the retaining walls, there may be an early response and then a more nuanced response as we go forward. So I don't think you have to solve everything, but if we can do something in the shorter term that may at least assist, and then keep at it in the second round, whatever that is, but we'll have an opportunity. Let me come back to Councilor Wright, who had some more ideas she wanted to raise.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I have a first of a question, and I was talking to a few architects in the last few days. It seems like a lot of the de minimis has been removed from our zoning, and I was wondering why that was removed.
The 400 square feet, the minimum?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was removed. Mr.
Could you
Lamel?
repeat that? I didn't hear it.
The question was, has the de minimis ordinance, we had it passed many years ago when I was on the council, halfway through my tour, to say that if you added less than 400 square feet, like a mudroom or something like that, you could do that within the existing envelope, and I think by right without having to go through a special permit. This was a case where we'd been getting a lot of these through the special permit process, and basically the special permit seemed to be getting approved routinely, and so we backed it out.
We'd have to double check. I just did a quick look on the zoning ordinance online, and it seems that the de minimis relief section is in there.
Okay.
Okay.
7.8.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
All right.
So then, some ideas to incentivize keeping the existing building is allowing remodeling of attics without changing your FAR. If you don't add any more dormers or anything else, just it's all interior. Making some of these processes easier or by right, so that we don't go into a special permit or a tear down. And I don't know if this is going to be part of this, or maybe this needs to be a separate docket item, but one of the other things are the BU lots, and they're tearing that down and making it all residential, but they're using the BU setbacks and configuration for the lot. And I'd like to see, if you're going to tear down a BU business lot and do all residential, you should, adhere to a residential zoning. And I don't know if that, Mr. Lee, maybe, is that possible? If you're changing the use on that lot, can we change the zoning of the lot?
Can I just want to comment quickly. Yeah. If you are tearing down something in a BU district and building all residential, that's coming to the council for a special permit, because you can't build fully residential in BU by right. So those are, we can look at how the setbacks apply, but those should be getting special permits. In regard to the attic space, if you're only doing interior renovations today, that doesn't affect your FAR.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Councilor Farrell.
Thank you. I'm not as versed in all of this as all of my colleagues, but I'm curious about the by right existence of 4-foot walls or 3-foot 9, 11-inch walls. In my opinion, that helps to incentivize teardowns because you can build a bigger house if the house is taller. You get that basement that isn't considered, as I understand it, in the FAR. And I guess I just wonder why we're allowing houses to be built way up high.
Well, this is a part of the item that I think we're talking about earlier, which is the how you measure height. As I again recall from the prior testimony, that the 4-foot retaining wall is something for which you need to get a building permit, as I understand it. A 3.9-foot building retaining wall does not require one. But the concern you raise about oversized structures and what is being really the impact of having, a string of houses where everybody's at street level and then this enormous thing comes up is basically what we're trying to deal with in the main item beyond the 4-foot grade change. 4-foot set retaining wall, beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'll need to have a conversation to understand that better. I don't understand why we have a by right for 4-foot, 3-foot 11 wall.
It's just not regulated. It's not that it's by right. It's just that the regulation, as I understand it, kicks in when you get 4 feet.
I don't know why it's not regulated, but thank you.
It maybe has something to do with the building code, but it's a fair question. So
thank you.
When we go back and redo that, if I think you can clarify that. Councilor Oliver, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of providing a little feedback and direction here, I believe that we're on the right track here with the example, or at least I believe we're on the right track with the direction I see Needham, Lexington going in terms of reducing the overall size of the structures that can be built after something is at least theoretically torn down here. I'm assuming that that's baked into both of those communities' changes. And one thing I do want to point out with regards to Portland, the Oregon example here, and the missing middle, so to speak. What's interesting here is if I'm reading this correctly, they're also going in excuse me, in a direction that I think has merit, which is basically saying, they went from a 6,700 square foot house size down to somewhere more in the range of 3,500 squares, which I think is what I'm reading here, which does also make sense. That is taking away the incentive to pull down a 5,000 square foot house, so to speak, and build something new as opposed to adaptive reuse. So from that perspective, if I'm reading those correctly, that's the knee-jerk, if you will, feedback that I have on this. But thank you.
Okay. I think just to give a sense of what I'm hearing to the department for next steps, I hear interest in investigating these paths that may reduce the building opportunity so that the existing structures are more likely to be preserved, and see what happens in the VCOD district for the adaptive multi-unit. But I think we'll continue the conversation, and I hope to be able to bring back something that, again, maybe we have some short-term things like changing the measurement criteria, and then the other case maybe involves some substantive changes in the basic framework. So we'll have a conversation to continue this, I hope, and deal with this year, I very much hope, in committee. Councilor Kalis.
I'll move hold.
Counselor Kalis has moved hold. All those in favor of hold? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. I think that is our last item, and it's
Oh,
five.
no.
Oh, Counselor Wright.
Didn't we, oh, I'm sorry. There was a memo here talking about VCOD and the quarterly update. I had some questions. They don't have to go through all that, but I have some questions on that.
I think we have a memo, but let me double check. It's not included in the agenda tonight, but it's informational,
Oh, okay.
right? But please convey your questions directly to the department if you would like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, anything else before us? We're going to be in the budget soon, and we're going to try and take up again the electrification ordinance after there's some information coming from the state that indicated some adjustments needed to be made. We hope that those adjustments can be made and we can bring it back to the committee for a further discussion and vote. But I just want to thank the members of the department and our able clerk for being so helpful, and also the members of the Planning and Development Board who are here, as well as our law department, and thank all of you. And I will say that we are adjourned at 5 minutes of 10. So trying to keep under the 10 o'clock. I don't want Councilor Farrell to go home late.